Town Hall with Congressman Bill Foster. My name is Tony, and I'll be your moderator this evening. We have hundreds of people joining us on Zoom and on Facebook Live at the moment, so hang tight and we'll get started in just a moment. I'm here with Congressman Bill Foster, and we are about to begin taking your questions live. If you would like to ask a question and are joining us on Zoom, click the Q&A button on the control toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Type your question into the text box that appears and then click send. If you're joining us on Facebook, drop your question in the comment section of the live stream. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Congressman Foster.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm coming to you tonight from my office in Washington, where we're trying to get some important things done during the Republican shutdown. I understand how scary these times are for many of you, especially those of you who rely on the very federal programs that the Trump administration is threatening. And that's why I have and will continue to host town halls, 11 town halls so far this year, in person, over the phone, and online, to ensure that you all know what we are trying to get done in Washington on your behalf. You know, the nature of this shutdown is pretty simple. Trump and the congressional Republicans are insisting that Democrats vote for their cuts to healthcare, to Medicare, to Medicaid, to insurance premium support, and to SNAP, and other essential programs, all in order to pay for tax cuts for their billionaire donors. And we're simply not going to do that. My Democratic colleagues and I stood firmly in opposition to the Republican budget, and we voted no on a bill that would throw millions of Americans off their health care and gut food assistance for those who need it the most. Right now, my Democratic colleagues and I are fighting to prevent a Republican funding bill that would raise health premiums for hundreds of thousands of people in Illinois. And when I'm back in Illinois, I've stood with many of you at protests, such as the No Kings Day protest and other peaceful demonstrations across our district to show the anger and the frustration that we all feel at this time. I've hosted roundtables and with advocates and organizations directly impacted by the Trump administration, in places like local food banks, like public school superintendents and local librarians, small business owners and manufacturers. I assured you that in Congress, we're doing everything at our disposal to fight back against Trump and the Republicans' reckless cuts to services that so many people need. But everyone has a piece in this fight, and I'm glad to see folks here today that are engaged on the issues that matter the most to them. Well, thank you all, and now let's get to your questions.
Thank you, Congressman. And with that, we're going to start things off with our first question. We're going to start off with a question we've received over social media. Bridget from Bolingbrook wants to know, why are we in a government shutdown?
Well, I gave you the simple version of it, but it is really pretty basic. Republicans have shut down the government because they're insisting that Democrats go along with their cuts to health care, which we're simply not going to do. Approximately 400,000 people in Illinois depend on the Affordable Care Act tax credits to be able to pay for their health insurance. The ACA tax credits were passed in 2021 as part of the American Rescue Plan, and they were extended by Democrats as part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And Republicans now are insisting that these credits expire. And what that means is that Illinois families could see their insurance premiums double, and with some seeing an increase in health insurance premium costs of over $17,000 a year. The Republicans' budget is already going to cut millions of dollars from Medicaid, which is going to put both health care and end-of-life care for seniors at risk. So, I'm not against striking a deal here. I stand ready to pass bipartisan funding that reopens the government and does not cause a healthcare crisis for the people that I represent. So I'm in DC right now. We've got a lot of serious work that's not getting done by the Republicans that have canceled votes for 2 weeks straight now. So we're here, and Republicans are unfortunately nowhere to be found.
We'll now move on to our next question. Linda wants to know, why hasn't Mike Johnson sworn in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva?
Oh, yeah, well, that is One of the really disappointing things is just the level of bad faith with which the Republican leadership is operating right now. It is a matter of common courtesy that when there is someone newly elected in a special election, but Congress isn't in session, that you normally let the person get sworn in as soon as it's clear that the election has been won. And this allows you to be sworn in, start running your office, setting up your office, and starting to get ready to conduct votes when we get back in session. But the problem is that he is there. So two Republicans so far this term, Speaker Johnson has said, okay, go ahead. You've gotten elected on a special election, you're immediately signed in. But now a Democrat, Representative-elect Grijalva, I think a lot of people believe that they understand why he's making an example out of her. It is because she, as soon as she gets sworn in, will be able to sign the discharge petition. She will be the 218th signature on the petition, a bipartisan discharge petition that will be for the release of the Trump Epstein papers, which the Republicans don't want to have to vote on. And so that they're trying to delay things as much as possible by refusing to swear in a duly elected member of Congress. It's not strictly against the law. It's not strictly against the rules. It's just acting in bad faith to have one set of rules for Republicans and a different one for Democrats. And it makes it hard to work and hard for Congress to work and do its job when the people running it are acting in that bad faith.
All right, Karen and Chris want to know, are you foregoing your salary while all the federal employees lose theirs?
Yeah, well, what I've done in the past was contributed during shutdowns, to contribute to the Northern Illinois Food Bank, which is a wonderful organization that really helps food pantries throughout the district. They're sort of a wholesale organization, the wholesaler for food delivery, food at scale to the food pantries that typically see a real increase in need during a government shutdown. And so that's what I've done in past shutdowns, and I'll be doing it again this time.
All right. Diane wants to know, after you go back to work and complete a budget, can you please start impeachment procedures before Trump totally destroys Americans and the country? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this is a discussion we have every day. To actually successfully impeach him, we're going to need a handful of Republicans. It's absolutely clear the president has performed impeachable acts. He's repeatedly shown just a flagrant disregard for the law. But if we attempt impeachment without being able to get at least a handful of responsible Republicans to go along with it, it will bring it up, it'll get lost, and you can imagine what they'll be saying. Oh, it's Democrats and Trump impeachment, dementia, or what do they call it? The Trump derangement syndrome, they call it. It's not correct. This is a massive assault on the Constitution that he's performing, but we win the vote when we can get a couple of Republicans to agree that the time has come for that. I don't think it's hopeless. I know that they're from just individual confidential conversations that there are a lot of Republicans extremely uncomfortable with what he's doing. Everyone who's working and concerned with the business community is just horrified with the way he's sort of turned the White House into his own private business opportunity for the Trump family organization to earn a lot of money by abusing his power. But like I say, until we get Republicans to be willing to stand up and vote that way, I think it's premature to bring up articles of impeachment. We also don't know the exact set of articles of impeachment that Republicans will go for first. And so frankly, we have to, as soon as we get an understanding of what is the straw that breaks their camel's back on this, that's the point at which we can really draft the exact articles of impeachment that Republicans will support. There's also a lot, every member of Congress, including myself, has a long list of fixes that we have to perform on our government to make sure that we're insulated against some future version of Donald Trump. One of these is the Protect Our Democracy Act that I co-sponsor. That just makes it clear that future presidents can't self-deal like Trump does when he goes off and makes some international deal with groups in the Gulf, and the exact same groups are negotiating tariff agreements or import agreements. And then at the same time, the Trump family comes in and negotiates with the exact same players, personal business deals. Just the fact that Donald Trump every day tweets out on his private social media thing, market moving information, which makes it essential for anyone who's serious about following the markets, for example. They have to get a subscription to his personally owned social media account. The list goes on and on. Any one of them impeachable, and the question is at what point Republicans are willing to just stand up and say enough is enough.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Just as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question and are joining us on Zoom, click the Q&A button in the control bar at the bottom of the screen, type your question into the text box that appears, and then click send. If you're joining us on Facebook, drop your question into the comment section of the live stream. All right, our next question comes from John, who says, Congressman, what is the Democratic Party doing to stop the invasion of Chicago? Innocent people are being hurt, arrested, and zip-tied without cause or warrant.
Yep, one of his many violations of the Constitution. His deployment of the National Guard to Chicago, it's nothing short of an authoritarian power grab, and also a complete misuse of federal resources. It's rather interesting that he has deployed the Texas National Guard into Illinois, where Texas actually has a higher crime rate than than Illinois does. He's doing unconstitutional things and then lying about his reasons for doing it. So this week, my Illinois colleagues and I Democratic colleagues sent a letter to President Trump demanding that he call off the deployment. And we're obviously going after him in the courts. It's not going as fast or as well as we would hope, but that's our first line of defense. And the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago, I believe, jointly sued the administration. And so far, a judge has declined to issue a temporary restraining order, but that is not over. She, I believe, just needed more time to study it, which is, I guess, a legitimate response, but that was the response. And we'll see how it plays out in the courts. And even if we do okay in the lower courts, God knows what happens when it hits Trump's Supreme Court. But that's the situation. It's another situation where we don't have the laws in place that make it absolutely clear what's acceptable and what's not.
All right, our next question comes from Bob. He wants to know, how can we get the Epstein files released?
All right, now you get to hear something really wonky. There's something called a discharge petition. Well, let's see. First off, the Speaker of the House, one of the real powers of the Speaker of the House of Representatives is they have almost dictatorial control over what we get to vote on. For example, that dictatorial power was used to block when the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform back in 2013. If I was working with Luis Gutierrez at the time, and he and I were getting private commitments from Republicans that they weren't going to publicly say they would support immigration reform, but once in their career, they would take a bullet for that. If we can get the Speaker Boehner at the time, to bring it up for a vote. And so unfortunately we couldn't, and it's one of the tragedies of history that despite passing with a strong margin in the Senate, we were not even allowed to vote on it, and it died with that session of Congress. So there's a mechanism around this, and the same thing is happening with the Epstein bill. There's legislation to release the files, to force the administration to release the files, and we have Republicans in support of that. The original co-sponsors were one Democrat and one Republican, but the Speaker refuses to bring that up because he doesn't want to embarrass Trump with the release of the Trump Epstein files. And so the tool that we have at hand is something called the discharge petition. And what it means is that if a majority of members of Congress sign on to a petition called a discharge petition, the bill can be automatically brought up for a vote, even over the speaker's, dead body or opposition. Shouldn't even. Anyway, over the speaker's adamant opposition. And so this is a great tool. It was used successfully for generations as really a control on the unlimited dictatorial power of the speaker. But it's, for complicated reasons, hasn't been that effective in the recent past. However, this time it looks like it'll be successful as soon as we get that one more Democratic member of Congress sworn in. And so, I guess that's basically it. The other big picture on the Epstein thing is that we have to hold everyone responsible for all these really terrible crimes against young women, regardless of their personal position and power. I have no idea what sort of powerful people may or may not show up in the Epstein files, but that should not matter in a government where no one is above the law. So I think I join all Democrats in wanting those files released, and we have some Republicans and a mechanism to get that done within. Well, the first thing that'll have to happen is the Speaker Johnson is going to have to call the House back to session. If he keeps them, out on vacation indefinitely, then we can't do the discharge petition. And that may be one of the big reasons that he's keeping everyone out on vacation, at least all the Republicans.
All right. Our next question comes from Todd. He wants to know, do you and other Democrats favor bailouts for farmers?
Well, farmers don't want bailouts. They want markets for their goods. And one of the features of Donald Trump is that he actually has this reputation for knowing how to negotiate. But whenever he negotiates, somehow only his friends end up on the good side of the negotiation, and small towns and farmers in the U.S. end up on the wrong side. So, for example, the biggest pain point for farmers in Illinois and the Midwest right now is that normally our largest export market is China. And so Trump sent his guys over to negotiate with China for a lot of things. There's always 6 things on the table. And so what Trump came home with is he came home with a deal that would allow his billionaire friends in Silicon Valley to make a lot of money selling high-end and very dangerous artificial intelligence chips to the Chinese. All right. But what he did not do was negotiate a better sales situation for the soybean farmers, because there have been 0 purchases of soybeans by China ever since Trump took office. But he doesn't care. He pretends he cares about farmers, and he doesn't. And so now when the Republicans who represent the farming districts are letting him know just how badly this is being taken, he says, "Oh, we'll just throw them a few $1 billion." But farmers don't want temporary bailouts. What they want is to have good export markets. In the last Trump administration, Trump spent half of his time, insulting Mexico and telling them they were going to that Mexico was going to pay for the wall, and said all sorts of horrible things about Mexico. At which point Mexico said, "Look, we're just going to buy all of our corn, not from the U.S. where we normally do. We're going to buy it from Brazil, where, by the way, Brazil gets 2 crops a year." Okay, and so long term, they are a serious competitive threat to the corn from the Midwest. And and this happened on his first term, and he bailed out, to the tune of over $25 billion of taxpayer money went to try to undo the damage that his tariffs and insults had done to the corn export market. And now, there's a comparable amount of damage being done to the soybean export market, and he apparently just doesn't care. And he's going to try to find some pot of money that he has control over and do a one-time bailout. But the one-time bailout will not work if the markets are destroyed, because you're going to have to bail out the farmers every single year until they start buying American produce again. So anyway, this is a sensitive thing for me, because I hear from not only farmers but manufacturers all the time at how stupid the trade negotiations are that are being done and actually hurt American businesses, hurt American farmers. And it's either incompetent or he just doesn't care.
All right, our next question comes from Carol, and she wants to know, what can we as citizens do to make our voices heard? I make calls, send emails, and still feel like I'm not listened to.
Well, join the club. We're trying to get the attention of this administration where these, out trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize by throwing, American farmers and workers under the table and everything else. It's so I don't want to like say that here is the thing that is guaranteed to work. But there's one thing I'll tell you, these protests that have been happening, they get heard. I guess it's no secret. I'm sort of an old white guy. And so very often when we're coming and going from votes, I find myself in an elevator full of Republicans and they sit there and talking among themselves, not realizing, that there's this Democrat in the elevator with them. And so the week after we had the first No Kings rally, where you had the simultaneous thing where you had Trump having his military parade birthday party show that had terrible attendance, and all those pictures of Marco Rubio sitting there looking glum on why am I here looking at this pathetic little parade, and all that was on video. And at the same time, on the same day, you had hundreds of thousands of Americans out with the No Kings protests, letting the world know what we thought of them. That got noticed by Republicans. There were some nervous discussions among Republicans in the elevator where they were saying, yeah, how many of those? Well, first off, they were saying, how wasn't that a sad spectacle with Trump's parade? Yeah, boy, I'm glad I didn't stay in Washington for that. And then the second part of the discussion, yeah, how many of those No Kings protests did you? Oh, I had 5 in my district. Oh boy, that sounds rough, and it gets noticed. And one of the reasons that they're effective is that, I think most of the people who attend those protests, we know how they're going to vote. Most of the, hardcore MAGA Republicans who go to Trump's rallies, we know how they're going to vote. But there are a lot of people who are just, trying to get on with their lives. They're holding down 2 jobs and they don't have enough time to think about politics. They very often take a sort of a shortcut in saying, if Trump has done something to make this number of people, and these are ordinary people that I know, really mad enough to go out and protest on a beautiful day when there are lots of fun things to do, and then maybe Trump has done something wrong. And it's not a complicated, read a 20-page white paper and figure out what the policy that you disagree with. It's just knowing that, look, he has done something that's really upset a lot of people that they know because they're their friends, are normal people furious at what Trump is doing. Then that's the simple message that does get absorbed even when they're very busy and haven't even started to think about politics yet. So they don't give up on those is a really important thing.
All right, our next question comes from Brett. He wants to know, any talk on lowering prices on everyday necessities Americans use?
Well, yeah, you can stop these stupid tariffs. That would help. What happens is that it's sort of these tariffs are coming. They haven't all hit yet, because what happens is that every business that imports things says, "Oh boy, the tariffs are coming," and they stockpile a large amount of material to sneak them into the United States before the tariffs hit. But everything that's coming in since then are saying, 25%, 50%, even more than 100% cost increases for imported parts. And it's not just directly things like, I don't know, Christmas tree lights that are made in another country. These are things, if you're an American manufacturer, very often you're putting together components from, 8 different countries and a lot of stuff made in the United States. And that hurts your cost of producing the material. And when you then try to export the goods, it makes the American goods non-competitive because they've had to pay these tariffs to even bring the parts in to assemble them. So, I think it's very telling that if you look at the Trump economic team, who are the brainwaves that have come up with this, none of them have ever manufactured anything. It's one of the few times I've ever really agreed with Elon Musk when he was getting in his Twitter war with Trump, or maybe one of Trump's people that were doing the tariffs. He said, "You guys, you haven't built squat," though he used a more colorful word. And I think he was absolutely right. There is literally no one negotiating Trump's trade deals that has ever manufactured anything in their life. Like I come from a manufacturing background. I'm best known as being the PhD physicist in Congress, but I started business. So I program machine tools. I design parts. I figured out the, make versus buy decisions. And the company that I started with my little brother and I, just celebrating its 50th anniversary. And it has over 1,500 employees, and we've kept those manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, which I'm very proud of. But I tell you, no one on the Trump team has ever built anything. I'm not sure they've ever farmed. And yet they are the ones who are supposedly the experts that are going to be negotiating these deals. And that's why, frankly, the deals end so badly, not only for farmers and for consumers, but for businesses in America. So, I've supported legislation to overturn the tariffs. I think we have a decent chance of actually getting rid of some of the tariffs and maybe most of them in the courts. Because what he's done is that he has taken, well, how did we get into this? Because if you read the Constitution says Congress should be in charge of tariffs. But Congress has over time delegated the authority for the tariffs. And the reason we did that is when Congress was in charge of tariff policy, then you always had this question, well, should we protect the Wisconsin milk industry or the Pennsylvania steel industry when we're negotiating trade deals? And so after there was a lot of contentious fighting inside Congress, and we said, oh, why don't we'll put all of tariff negotiations in charge with one person who has the country's best interest at heart. And that used to be the president. And now we have a president who, frankly, has the best interests for his heart are of the Trump family business. And it's not, but we have to rethink a lot of the trust that we mistakenly placed in an executive that we thought was always going to be a person of good faith, working for the best interests of the country. There's also a big problem with inflation lurking on the corner. I think you all remember during the campaign, Trump repeatedly promising in his first year in office, he was going to cut the cost of energy by a factor of 2. Okay, that he had, and he said it again and again. You'd cut electricity by a factor of 2. Well, guess what? It's going up. He's going to cut groceries by some huge amount. That was a different set of promises. He said, oh, we were going to have health care, and it was going to be so good and so cheap that people just won't believe how cheap it'll be. Well, guess what? This month, we're going to see statements come out where people are going to have sticker shock when they see how much their health insurance premiums are going to go up. And so just he's failing to deliver on every one of his promises to lower costs. And the real answer to that is to Congress to step up and put the economy of this country back on the right course. We know how to do it. If you look at what happened after we passed all of the interventions after the financial crisis, that triggered over 10 years of sustained economic growth, the strongest period of sustained economic growth in our country's history. And we just have to put our economy back on that basis so that it's improving instead of getting worse, which is frankly the way it is.
All right. Our next question comes from Margaret. She says, I heard that the president is considering not paying federal employees after the shutdown ends. Will furloughed and accepted federal employees who are working be paid when the shutdown ends?
Well, we passed a law and he signed a law back in 2019. Because of our experience with previous shutdowns, we understood we need some clarity about the conditions under which federal employees will be paid and when they will not be paid during a shutdown. And so that we passed in 2019, and President Trump signed into law a law that said that furloughed workers must be paid, full stop. But so then what Trump, of course, has done is got one of his lackeys somewhere in an Office of Management Budget or something to write a memo that says, oh, I know that's what the law says, but we don't really have to obey the law, which is sort of the way he operates these days. And so in order to not pay employees, Congress would have to repeal the law that President Trump signed and pass a new law overruling that law. And I think that even that would get in constitutional trouble if we tried doing that. But the Republicans simply don't have an appetite. They don't want to talk about this issue. Although there are lots of Republicans that have a lot of federal employees and military employees and so on in their districts, and they're not going. And that's why we had a strong bipartisan vote in favor of a law that said clearly furloughed workers must be paid, full stop. So I think this is another case where we're going to have to take the administration into the courts to get them to stop doing illegal stuff.
All right, Claire wants to know what's happening with the Obamacare tax credits. I'm worried about losing my health insurance.
Well, so what's going to happen is you won't lose it. It'll just get a heck of a lot more expensive. And that's, and for a lot of people that can't afford it, that means, so what these are what are called the enhanced premium tax credits, which is a real Washington word for pretty simplest thing, which is the government helping people that need help with being able to afford the tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, sometimes referred to as Obamacare. And these are all set to expire in December. They started in 2021, and they were a huge help in getting people through the COVID period. But they're set to expire, and Republicans are thrilled because they basically hate everything about the Affordable Care Act, and this is anything bad they can do to the Affordable Care Act. They seem always to want to do it. But the point is that if these expire, we're going to revert to the original premium tax credits, which are passed way back in 2010. This is when it brings back memories of how hard a fight it was to get the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act passed at all. And all of the lies that we had to put up with, what were said about that, about death panels and stuff that were just lies. But so what's going to happen? We'll go back to the 2010 law, and so your financial support won't go away completely, but you're just going to have to pay a lot more out of pocket for your premiums, and many families are going to see their premiums double because of that. And this is one of the reasons why this is not okay to have these laws in place that will double people's premiums. I actually don't understand why the Republicans have chosen to fight over that issue, but that's what I guess they just really don't like the thought of the Affordable Care Act helping people. But for whatever reason, that's the situation. And it's my hope, frankly, that if people speak out and let it be known to Republicans that when they get these, the notices are going out sometime in the next couple of weeks in many places. The notices that here is what your new premiums are going to be. And, when people in Republican districts see what the big, beautiful bill is doing to their insurance premiums, they're not going to be happy. I mean, this is so... it's obvious even to Marjorie Taylor Greene that this is a bad idea. She has gone out and sort of gone after Republican leadership on doing something that hurts, I'm sure, a lot of people in her district. And so this is, anyway, it's not for no reason that we've decided to, pick this hill to fight on. There's thousands of outrages against our Constitution, against human rights, against common human decency that this administration is pursuing. But this is one that it's just so clear that this is the one we're not going to yield on.
All right, our next question comes from Liz. Liz wants to know, what is the mindset of the Republicans that no one is stepping up to speak out against Trump's antics? Please help us understand.
What this is a lot like. It's a lot like members of the Illinois legislation under the Mike Madigan machine. And, this was the bad old times. If you talk to people who had tried to do the right thing for the state of Illinois and had to cross the Michael Madigan machine down in Springfield, it was pretty hard. You'd get threatened, for example, okay, you're going to lose your next primary because he was going to draw a new map that would make your seat unwinnable. or draw you out of the district entirely, which is a fatal problem in the Illinois State House. And so he was using the power of his political machine to reward and to punish individual members, including with threatening them with being unelected. That is exactly what President Trump is doing to Republicans right now. He routinely threatens people on Twitter and in private that if they cross him in any way, that what they're going to do is they're going to see in the next Republican primary, they're going to see a well-funded opponent endorsed by Donald Trump, and they will probably lose that primary. And it's sort of interesting. He's operating a political machine very much like the old political machines that used to operate in many cities and many states, like until recently in Illinois. And so this is a very sick form of democracy when it gets captured by a boss man who just terrifies people and is willing to make examples out of people. And so, this will change when Republicans become more afraid that they will lose their general election than they will lose their primary because Trump has tweeted in favor of their opponent. And so for that to happen, you're going to have see people all over the United States just say, look, we've had it with the Republican Party unless they can break free of this lawlessness that we're seeing out of the Trump administration. But and the first few people, it's interesting to look at what happened to break the Madigan machine in Illinois. The first person that stood up, everyone said, no one will ever challenge Mike Madigan, as speaker or anything else. And we had a representative, Stephanie Kifowitz from Aurora, known to many of you. And she said, I've just had it with this. If no one else is going to do it, I will challenge Mike Madigan. And then I said, wow, I can't believe you did that. Well, if you're going to do it, then I will. And immediately you got a really strong group of people and a challenge that Madigan couldn't resist because someone had the courage to stand up and yell bullshit. And this can happen. This can happen in the United States House and the United States Senate, but it just hasn't yet.
All right, our next question comes from Fran. Fran wants to know, how can we protect elections, particularly the upcoming midterms?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that every precinct has election judges of both parties with their eyes on how the ballot's working. One of the things I'm kind of proud of is that our elections are actually pretty hard to hack. Because the way they work is that most all ballots are cast in person or in mail by going into a precinct. And there are Democratic poll watchers and Republican poll watchers making sure everything's on the up and up, making sure that the people who are showing up there they're actually my neighbors. I recognize enough of them that I'm pretty confident that we're not having some weird thing go on. They pay attention to who's on the voter file and who's legal to vote. And then they supervise the counting of the ballots in their individual precincts. And then every poll watcher can go onto the county website and look in the county website. Was my precinct reported correctly on the county website? And if they don't trust them being added up right, get out your spreadsheet program, enter in all the numbers and add them up yourselves. And so it's sort of hard to figure out how to hack that kind of election. But it depends crucially on having trust at the precinct level in every precinct in the country. So that would be my number one thing. It's just make sure that every precinct you care about has a poll watcher that you trust, making sure things are on the up and up. Of course, there's many other things we have to do. There's a huge problem with the corrosive effect of money in politics. There's just a long list of things. If you look at H.R. 1, back from when Democrats were in control of the House, it's a pretty good summary of how you get money out of politics. How you it had gerrymandering reform. So instead of all this nonsense we're having down in Texas and trying to figure out if we can retaliate in California or not, or in Missouri or all the other Indiana, the different states there, trying to basically cheat in by changing the maps halfway through. that would all have been illegal under H.R. 1, where you have nonpartisan redistricting committees to draw fair maps. It's actually one of the really encouraging things about humanity and American citizens is that in states that have adopted nonpartisan redistricting committees, so they appoint these committees, and everyone knows on the committee who the Democrats are and who the Republicans are. But what they do is that they take an oath to act in a fair manner and a nonpartisan manner. And after taking that oath, they do a pretty good job of making fair maps. And it wasn't obvious that it would work out that well, but in the states that have tried it, it has. It's one of these miracles of humanity, sort of like Wikipedia, which you'd never think would work and works pretty darn well at sticking to the truth. And so this is, I think, one of the many ways that we have to make our system stronger when we finally get, this clown out of the White House and a normal set of Republicans acting the way, responsible Republicans used to in the U.S. Congress.
All right, our next question is, many people have written in asking about your vote on the Charlie Kirk resolution. Can you explain that vote?
Yeah, well, first off, I voted in favor of the resolution, which was primarily to condemn the act of violence that took Charlie Kirk's life. And I voted the same way, and the House unanimously condemned the attacks on the Minnesota lawmakers. Melissa Hortman, John Hoffman, we should remember their names, and their spouses. And it's tough. And I think there's a special place actually for people who are attacked or hurt or lose their lives as elected public servants. There will always be people, outside of elected office that are becoming big political figures. But someone who has the courage to serve in political offices, knowing the history of this, of America, it started before Abraham Lincoln. I was friends with Gabby Giffords. We used to talk about, how do you handle it when during the Tea Party period, people would come up to you and act crazy. And, unfortunately, someone came up to her and her team, with a gun, and it didn't end well. And so I feel very strongly that that we have to just have 100% red line against any act of violence, of political violence. Of course, the Republicans, because they have control over what we vote for, put all sorts of things saying, what a wonderful human being what Charlie Kirk was, which is, to my mind, very far from true. That's not enough reason to, anyway, that sort of, it was not an easy vote, but I think I didn't want to be on the side of not condemning an act of violence, of political violence. And another point on that is, if we're going to stand united against the political violence, then I think those in MAGA world must confront their own record. It is complete hypocrisy to denounce one act of violence while ignoring the fact that, Donald Trump himself has repeatedly encouraged political violence, from his incitement on January 6th, his pardoning of the cop killers there, to the early in his campaign, he suggested that to his supporters that they might wield Second Amendment rights against Hillary Clinton. Okay. And everyone knew what he was talking about. And so you can't, anyway, we just have to, our democracy cannot function if we have any tolerance for, for political violence. And that's what struck the balance in my decision to vote for that, despite it just some ridiculous praising of someone who didn't deserve that praise.
Juan wants to know, how can we combat the housing crisis affecting working families?
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to do is we've got a bunch of programs that work well that we just don't put enough funding to them. Yeah, and the trade-off here is pretty simple. We can cure homelessness in the United States for about $15 billion a year. Okay, that's roughly the cost of one carrier group in the Navy, just to pick one way that we spend money. Okay, and we have, I don't know, 10 or so carrier groups. And so the question, if we had one fewer carrier group and we had no homelessness, would we be a greater country? So that we know how to solve these problems. And you can solve them in two different ways. You can solve them with just things like voucher programs where you help people afford housing. And you can also solve it partly on the supply side by making it easier and cheaper for developers to build new housing. And a lot of the problems there honestly come from at the local level and can't really be dealt with directly. But the federal government can make incentives so that if cities are willing to make it easier for developers to build new and affordable workforce housing, then they should be allowed to qualify for basically federal grant money to help them, pay the costs that housing imposes on them. And so that there are a variety of offices that were of different programs that in different offices in the government that have been shown to support really great housing developments. And there are a lot of individual groups, the Habitat for Humanity. We got $1.25 million for them, $3 million for Hesed House, which is a wonderful organization that helps people in immediate homeless danger. And $3 million for back when I represented Joliet. The Joliet Housing Authority has one of the neatest developments Liberty Meadows it's called. And if you walked into that, it would look like a completely normal suburb. You wouldn't think of it at all, but it's actually for first-time home buyers, people who never owned their own home before. And you rent the home for a decade. And at the end of that decade, if you're still current, you've kept the house up, the house is yours. And it's a wonderful thing. It's been a big success in the 10 years I represented Joliet, and it's one that's being copied all around the country, frankly. And so there are a lot of things that we know how to do this, but you can't do that if your first focus is that we need to have $5 trillion of tax cuts for the billionaires. And in the big beautiful bill, that was their first and only priority. Everything was secondary they had to go and pay back all of the billionaires that funded their campaigns. $5 trillion of tax cuts for the very wealthy was sort of the top item on that. And there are many other ways that the government is wasting money right now. You want a big one that irritates me as a physicist is the so-called Golden Dome. And this is the resurrection of Ronald Reagan's dream that somehow we'll be able to make a magical missile defense that will make the United States safe against all nuclear weapons. Okay. Now, for 40 years, physicists have been patiently explaining to mostly Republican politicians why this will never work. I could give a 2-hour speech on all the ways that it can be defeated by not even a very competent enemy for a lot less money than the $200 billion that we are going to be spending to try to do it. We've already wasted $200 billion on a system that does not work today. And we're now going to be just in Trump's plan is to waste another $200 billion just during his presidency on this. And just remember, curing homelessness is not, $200 billion. It's about $15 billion a year. So we know how to do this. We just need the political will.
All right, our next question comes from Cindy. Cindy wants to know, it seems that nobody in Congress will cross the aisle. Why is that? Do the Republicans really think Trump will be president forever?
Well, I don't want to try to psychoanalyze the Republican caucus on this. Well, they know for sure that if they collaborate with Democrats on meaningful legislation that crosses the president, then he's going to just say, okay, he'll tweet against you, he'll recruit a MAGA person to run against you, and you'll lose the Republican primary. And that is the truth. I mean, he has a long list of names on the wall of people that he has defeated in Republican primaries because they have crossed him. The only person with enough guts to stand up against him is the guy who's right across the street from me. I think if I opened up the door in the back here, you could see his nameplate. Is Thomas Massey. And Thomas Massey is a very right-wing Republican, but he crossed Trump. Trump sent someone after him, and Thomas Massey beat him, beat the Trump sponsored opponent pretty badly. And so he says, okay, I'm not scared of you anymore. And so that's why he's the one who's leading the petition, the discharge petition, to try to get our hands on, or the public's eyes on the Jeffrey Epstein papers, because he is no longer scared of Trump. Now, most of them aren't in that position. And that's actually what's going on. You know, it's a hard thing to make the choice to be brave and give up your political career. You know, there have been 3 times in my career where I've been about to take a vote, and I'm about to walk out the door here, go down to the tunnel underneath to the Capitol and up and cast my vote. And so my chief of staff will come through the door up on the left. The doors, I guess you can't see it here. There's a door where my chief of staff would come out and talk to me and say, Bill, I want to talk to you. I know how you're going to vote on this, and I'm proud of the way you're going to vote. But it is my job to tell you that you are putting your reelection at risk. Okay? And that's a hard thing to do, because there are always things that you want to do with the rest of your career. And so those 3 times were when I voted for the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, when I voted for the automobile rescue, and when I voted for the TARP, the Wall Street rescue, and that was a tough one too. But you had to do it, or the economy would have never recovered. And then after those 3 votes, I lost my next election, and my chief of staff was right and warning me. But, I would take every one of those votes the same way again. But it's a hard thing to do, to know that everything you've worked hard to get elected to office, to put up with everything you do to just carry on in this job, and then you're going to throw it all away because of 1 vote. Why don't you just, go with the flow and do the easy thing? And so that's what you're asking these Republicans to do. And so I understand how hard it is. And I think we just need more of them to have the courage of an Adam Kinzinger or a Mitt Romney or the handful of other, or Thomas Massey, who put their reelection at risk by doing what they think is right for the country.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. Richard wants to know, if I see ICE taking someone who is not an undocumented immigrant, what should I do to help them?
Well, first thing, unfortunately, get out your camera, because that one's going to the courts. Okay. Do everything you can to be able to identify the ICE agent, get high quality video of it, and let the ICE agent know that they are on camera. Because one of the positive lessons of body cams for police is that everyone behaves better when they know they're on camera. And so you might get the ICE officer to back down if he knows that they're doing something illegal and that it's on video and it's going to court. That's, obviously I'm not advocating for any sort of violence. You then obviously call, in Illinois, the police are not, by and large, with very few exceptions, they're not interested in helping ICE tear apart their communities. They're letting the police know that this is happening is also very important. There are a number of groups that are just trying their best to keep vulnerable people away from ICE and to warn vulnerable people that ICE is coming for them, that there may be children who go to school and they come back from school and their parents have disappeared. This is the way, the deliberate cruelty with which this administration is deliberately operating ICE is really, really bad. It is inexcusable that there is deliberate racial profiling that at least some courts seem to think is all right on this. There are lots of people here in the United States without without documents. A lot of them, the old white guys like me that, and it's not okay that you're being targeted if you look brown, which is exactly what ICE is doing. And when that happens, I represent, Aurora and many other cities that have a significant Latino population. And then people who have been here for generations are still having to tell their children, if you go out, be sure to bring your passport with you, your proof of citizenship. It is insane. But that is the way, you have to remember that where Donald Trump comes from on this, that he was the one who, you remember the Central Park Five, the five innocent, in that case, African-American kids that Trump took out a full-page ad that turns out were not guilty. And it just, this is what he is. And it really, frankly, it's it's going to take us a long time to come to terms with why we chose this man to lead us.
All right, this is our last question of the town hall. The question is from Patricia, who wants to know, how can the retaliatory actions of Donald Trump against Democratic leaders be stopped? For example, suggesting that our governor or the mayor of Chicago be arrested, sending troops into cities where a majority of constituents are Democrats.
Well, this is not new. You remember his chant from his first reelection, "Lock her up, lock her up." You got the whole crowd cheering that way, and so that during his first term, he was frankly too disorganized to really get revenge on everyone he wanted to get revenge on. But he's apparently spent 4 years stewing about, oh boy, what am I going to do when I get back in power, and then I can really get and he's doing it. This putting James Comey on trial. That's a good one. Who he is convinced was acting in bad faith when he was investigating very credible reports of bad things happening during the campaign. And so James Comey is now standing trial. And when Trump apparently ordered the Department of Justice to go after Comey, that the career lawyer who was ordered to do that said, "Forget it. I'm not going to do it. He has not done anything wrong. I'm not going to be part of your deliberate revenge against your personal vendettas against anyone, and I resign." And so then Trump, at that point, sent in his private lawyer to take over that plate, who had like zero experience with the Department of Justice operations, but was put in charge of going and putting James Comey on trial because the first people, the responsible career lawyers in Department of Justice refused to do it. And so it's just really bad. I hope that we can depend on the courts to defend that, because lawyers, no matter where they come from ideologically, they're kind of proud of the law, that the law is what it says under the archway of the Supreme Court: equal justice under law. And all lawyers are kind of proud that they're part of a system that's a heck of a lot better than we all do what the strong man does. We tried that for most of human existence. That every tribe had their strong man, and you challenged the strong man, and if you won, you got to be the strong man, and if you lost, you got the hell beaten out of you and chased out of the tribe or worse. And that's not the way modern civilizations should arrive. And we're very proud that the United States led the way in equal justice under law for generations. And it's a tremendous backsliding when he sees that. So, it's another one of those issues where that might be the first line of defense is the courts, and I have optimism there. And that may well be one of the areas where you finally get Republicans to break with this president. When he starts going after individual businesses that has the business community on high alert. You know, when you saw Tim Cook had to go down, you know, all of iPhones were going to get tariffed really hard because they were being made in China. And then Tim Cook had to go down to kiss the ring in Mar-a-Lago. And so all of a sudden he got massive, you know, many billions of dollars of tariff relief by being nice to Donald Trump and saying great things about him and letting everyone know that he was bending a knee to Donald Trump. And then all of a sudden, and if that's what you have to do as a business to survive, to succeed in the United States, that's not a place where any responsible businessman wants to do business. And we're losing business investment like you wouldn't believe. What happened in Georgia, where, you know, my wife is Korean, and so she follows the Korean media reaction to the fact that there are these Korean subcontractors and putting together a battery factory that was a huge investment down in Georgia. And so they decided that the papers weren't proper on these subcontractors, and they went in and they put these Koreans in chains, handcuffs and chains. And Koreans have not seen that since the Japanese occupation of Korea. And it's just, you know, it's causing damage to the reputation of America as a place to do business that is going to take generations to repair. So anyway, and that's not a magic formula for stopping this, but it stops when every one of us, including the responsible Republicans, stand up and says enough is enough. I was, you know, proud that I joined my Democratic colleagues in condemning those comments that Trump made against the governor and the mayor. But it's you know, that's only part of his offensive behavior here. You know, the other thing is we just need politicians to just tone down the rhetoric, and particularly from the MAGA crowd, because there's no symmetry here. The people that are, you know, that are fighting, you know, to limit what ICE is doing, you know, they're fighting for their friends, and Trump is fighting for his billionaire buddies and his family fortune, and that's a big difference. Anyway, I think we're a little bit over time here. I just want to, you know, thank you all for staying involved. This is an important time in our country's history, and I'll see you all on the 18th at the next No Kings rally.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman. If your question did not get answered, make sure to fill out the post-webinar survey, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. If you want to catch the full recording of this town hall, make sure to check out our social media tomorrow or head directly to our YouTube channel at Rep. Bill Foster. All right, thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Congressman Foster.
Thank you.